The ship came out of hyperspace with a soft hum, and Park pressed his face against the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. The orbital station hung in the darkness of space, massive and cold, built from black metal that seemed to swallow the light of nearby stars. It looked like a fortress. It looked like something that did not want visitors. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said from behind him. She was smiling but could hear the nervousness in her voice. "That's one word for it," said Captain Lee. He stood near the door with his arms crossed, his face serious as always. "Looks like a prison to me." Turned away from the window and straightened his diplomatic uniform. He was not a tall man, and he was not particularly strong. His hair was already turning gray at the temples even though he was only 42. But he had kind eyes and a warm smile, and those things had opened more doors for humanity than any weapon ever could. "Remember the briefing," said. "They do not understand emotions the way we do. They think feelings are primitive. They think physical touch is strange and inappropriate. We must be careful." "I read the briefing," said. "Reptilian species, cold-blooded in every way. They raise their children with machines instead of parents. They don't even have a word for love." Shook her head. She was younger than both men, with sharp eyes and quick hands. She had studied hundreds of alien species, but she had never met them in person. "Every species has some form of attachment," she said. "Maybe they just express it differently." "Or maybe they really are as cold as their blood," replied. The docking procedure took another hour. When the airlock finally opened, a wave of cool air washed over the human delegation. The temperature inside the station was at least 10 degrees colder than the ship. Pulled his coat around his shoulders and stepped forward. A group waited for them on the other side. They were tall, nearly 7 feet each, with scales that shimmered between dark green and black. Their eyes were yellow with vertical pupils, and their faces showed no expression at all. They wore simple robes of gray fabric, and they stood perfectly still, like statues carved from stone. The one in front spoke first. His voice was deep and flat, translated through a device on his collar. "I am Hai. You are the human delegation." It was not a question. "Yes," said, bowing slightly. "I am Ambassador Park. This is Lieutenant Our and Captain Lee, head of security. We thank you for receiving us." Yellow eyes moved slowly across each human face. "Your thanks are noted but unnecessary. This meeting serves mutual interest, nothing more." Kept his smile in place. He had dealt with difficult species before. "Of course, Hai, we look forward to productive discussions." Turned without another word and began walking down the corridor. The other fell into step behind him. The humans followed. The station was enormous. The corridors stretched endlessly, lined with doors that led to chambers and offices and rooms whose purposes could not guess. Everything was made of the same black metal, polished until it reflected their images like dark mirrors. There were no decorations, no plants, no art, nothing soft or warm or alive. Walked close to and whispered, "It feels like a hospital or a morgue." "Keep your voice down," warned. "Their hearing might be better than ours." They passed several groups along the way. Each group stopped and stared at the humans with open curiosity, though their faces remained blank. Noticed that none of them spoke to each other. They communicated through small gestures, flicks of their clawed fingers, subtle movements of their tails. After 20 minutes of walking led them into a large chamber. It was some kind of reception hall, filled with long tables covered in strange foods. More stood around the room, watching, waiting. "You will eat," said, "then we will discuss terms." Nodded, "Thank you for your hospitality." Made a sound that might have been a laugh, but it had no warmth in it. "Hospitality is inefficient, but your species requires regular nutrition, and dead ambassadors serve no purpose." With that, he walked away to speak with other. Let out a slow breath. "Charming people." "Be patient," said. "We knew this would not be easy." They moved to one of the tables and examined the food. Most of it looked unappetizing to human eyes: raw meats, gray vegetables, bowls of liquid that smelled like copper. Found something that looked like fruit and took a careful bite. "Not terrible," she reported. "Tastes like a pear crossed with a mushroom." Was about to respond when something caught his attention, a movement at the edge of the room. He turned and saw a small figure hiding behind a pillar. It was a child. The cub was tiny compared to the adults, maybe 3 feet tall. Its scales were lighter in color, more gray than green, and its eyes were huge in its small face. It watched the humans with an intensity that seemed almost desperate. Glanced around. None of the adults were paying attention to the child. It stood alone, without any parent or caretaker nearby. Only a small floating drone hovered near its shoulder, monitoring. He felt something twist in his chest. The cub looked so lonely. Without thinking, raised his hand and gave a small wave. He smiled, the same warm smile he would give to any child on any planet. The cub's eyes went wide. Its mouth opened slightly. For a long moment it just stared at him, frozen in place. Then it raised its own small clawed hand and waved back. The movement was clumsy and uncertain, as if it had never made such a gesture before. "Touch's arm. Be careful," she whispered. "We don't know their customs around children." "I know," said, but he kept smiling at the cub anyway. One of the adults noticed the exchange. He walked over to the child and spoke sharply in their native language. The cub lowered its hand immediately and stared at the floor. The adult grabbed the drone and pressed something on its surface, then pointed toward a door. The cub walked away without looking back. The adult turned and looked at with cold, yellow eyes. "You should not interact with younglings. They are in development. Outside influence disrupts their growth." "I apologize," said. "I meant no offense." The adult said nothing more. He simply turned and walked away. Moved closer to, "What was that about?" The child said quietly, "It waved at me, and they didn't like it." Was watching the door where the cub had disappeared. "Did you see its face when you smiled at it?" "Yes." It looked surprised, but more than that. She paused, searching for the right word. It looked hungry, not for food, for something else. Nodded slowly. He understood exactly what she meant. The negotiations would take many days. They were difficult and demanding, and humanity had much to prove. But as lay in his cold quarters that night, staring at the black metal ceiling, he could not stop thinking about the small cub hiding behind the pillar. The way it had watched them. The way it had waved back. The way its eyes had looked when he smiled. Something was happening on this station. Something that did not expect and could not control. Did not know what it was yet, but he felt it in his bones the way he felt the cold in the air. Everything was about to change. 3 days passed on the station and the negotiations moved slowly. High questioned everything. He wanted to know about human technology, human military strength, human population numbers. He asked the same questions again and again, looking for weakness, looking for lies. Answered patiently each time. He showed documents and data. He explained human culture and human values, but only stared at him with those cold, yellow eyes and said things like inefficient and illogical and emotionally compromised. "They think we are children," said one evening as they walked back to their quarters. "Foolish children playing at civilization." "Let them think what they want," replied. "Our job is to build a bridge. Bridges take time." Was quiet. She had been quiet for 2 days now, ever since the reception. She kept looking around corners, watching doorways, searching for something. Knew what she was looking for. He was looking for the same thing. On the 4th day, finally saw the cub again. She was sitting in the garden atrium, a large room filled with strange alien plants that grew in perfect rows. The plants had gray leaves and gave off no smell. They were decorative but lifeless, grown for appearance rather than beauty. Was reviewing her notes on a tablet when movement caught her eye. The cub stood at the far end of the atrium, half hidden behind a row of plants. It watched her with those huge eyes, its small body tense and ready to run. Did not move. She did not wave or smile. She simply looked back at the cub and waited. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then very slowly, the cub took a step forward. Held her breath. The cub took another step, then another. It moved like a small animal approaching something dangerous, ready to flee at any moment. But it kept coming, drawn forward by something stronger than fear. When it was 10 feet away, it stopped. The floating drone hovered nearby, but the cub seemed to have learned how to stay just outside its monitoring range. Smart, thought. Very smart for something so young. "Hello," said softly. Her translator turned the word into the language. The cub tilted its head. It opened its mouth but made no sound. "My name is, what is your name?" Again, no response. But the cub did not run away. It stood there, watching, studying her face with an intensity that was almost unsettling. Had an idea. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a protein bar. It was a simple snack from Earth, sweet and chewy, wrapped in bright blue plastic. She had been saving it for later, but now she held it out toward the cub. "Are you hungry? Do you want this?" The cub's eyes moved to the protein bar. It sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring. Slowly, carefully, it took another step forward, then another. Its heart was beating fast. She kept her hand steady, the snack resting on her open palm. The cub reached out with one small clawed hand. But it did not take the food. Instead, its claws passed over the protein bar and touched its fingers. The cub's scales were cool and smooth, like polished stone. Its grip was gentle, almost timid. It held her hand and looked up at her face with an expression she had never seen on any before. Wonder, pure, simple wonder. Felt tears forming in her eyes. She did not know why. There was just something about this moment, something powerful and sad and beautiful all at once. "You don't want the snack," she whispered. "You want something else, don't you?" The cub made a small sound, a soft chirp that its translator did not convert into words. It held her hand, as if afraid she would pull away. A voice came from behind them. "What are you doing?" Turned her head, stood at the entrance to the atrium, his eyes wide with alarm. The cub saw him and immediately let go of his hand. It turned and ran, disappearing through a side door before either human could speak. Walked over quickly. "Are you crazy? What if someone saw that?" "No one saw," said, but her voice was shaking. "You don't understand. The cub didn't want the food. It wanted to hold my hand." "What?" "It reached right past the snack. It just wanted to touch me, to feel human skin." She looked down at her hand, still feeling the ghost of those cool scales against her fingers. "I think it's never been touched before, not by another living thing, only by machines." Was silent for a moment. He was a military man, trained to see threats and dangers everywhere, but even he could not miss the meaning of what was saying. "That's how they raise their children here," he said quietly. "With drones and machines. No parents, no holding, no warmth." "Yes. That's horrible." Nodded, "I know." They did not speak of it again that day. But that night, when the three humans gathered in his quarters for their evening meal, told him everything. Listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. "The briefing said do not form emotional bonds until adulthood," he said finally. "They believe childhood attachment creates weakness. They remove children from their parents at birth and raise them in development centers." "But that cub," said, "it wanted connection, it was desperate for it, I could feel it." "Maybe their scientists are wrong," said. "Maybe you can't breed out the need for touch. Maybe it's too deep, too basic." Thought about the first night, about the cub waving back at him from behind the pillar. He thought about the look in its eyes, that hungry look had described. "We need to be careful," he said. "If finds out about this, he will end the negotiations immediately. He might do worse. I know, said, but I can't just ignore that child. You didn't see its face when it held my hand. It was like watching someone take their first breath after drowning. The room fell silent. Outside the window, the stars burned cold and distant. The station hummed with the sound of machines and systems, all running perfectly, all designed for efficiency. There was no laughter here, no music, no crying bobbies or playing children. Just silence and duty and cold logic. We will continue the negotiations, said finally. We will be professional and careful, but if that cub comes to us again. He paused and looked at his colleagues with steady eyes. We will not turn it away. We will not pretend we do not see it. Whatever happens, we will show it kindness. Nodded slowly, agreed. Wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. Thank you. None of them knew what would happen next. None of them could have predicted the storm that was coming. But in that moment, in that cold room on that cold station, 3 humans made a decision that would change everything. They would not let a lonely child suffer alone. No matter the cost. The door to the human quarters slammed open at midnight. Woke instantly, his heart pounding. Soldiers poured into the room, their yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. They carried weapons that hummed with energy, pointed directly at his chest. Do not move, one of them commanded. You are confined by order of high. Raised his hand slowly. What is the meaning of this? We have diplomatic protection under the Treaty of First Contact. Your protection has been revoked. More soldiers entered the room. They grabbed roughly and pushed him toward the door. In the hallway, he saw and being dragged from their own quarters, was struggling against his captors, but they were too strong. Let go of me, shouted. This is an act of war. Be quiet, a soldier hissed. Your kind has done enough damage. They were taken to a large chamber deep in the station. The walls were bare metal, and the only furniture was a single table surrounded by chairs. High stood at the far end of the room, his claws folded behind his back, his face twisted with cold fury. Leave us, he said to the soldiers. They obeyed, filing out and sealing the door behind them. Turned to face the humans. His yellow eyes burned like fire. You have violated our laws, he said. His voice was quiet, but the anger in it was unmistakable. You have contaminated a youngling with your primitive customs. You have interfered with its development in ways that may never be repaired. Stepped forward. Hi, please listen. Silence, roar echoed through the chamber. I trusted you. I allowed you into our home, and you have betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. We didn't mean any harm, said. Her voice was trembling, but she forced herself to speak. The child approached us. It wanted contact it needed. It needed nothing, slammed his clawed fist against the table, leaving deep scratches in the metal. Children are raised in controlled environments precisely to prevent such contamination. Emotional attachment weakens the mind. It makes our people vulnerable. We removed this flaw from our species generations ago. With respect, said carefully, if it was truly removed, then why did your child seek us out? Why did it want to hold a human hand more than it wanted food? Scales seemed to darken. For a moment, thought that might strike him. The youngling you speak of is my offspring, said through clenched teeth. Its name is. It was developing normally until your arrival. Now it refuses to eat. It refuses to respond to its caretaker drones. It sits in the corner of its chamber and makes sounds that our physicians cannot explain. His eyes went wide. What kind of sounds? Crying, said, and the word seemed to cause him physical pain. It is crying. We do not have a word for this in our language. We had to search ancient texts to understand what was happening. The child is experiencing emotional distress of a kind not seen in for thousands of years. The room fell silent. Looked at, then at. All 3 of them understood what was happening, even if could not accept it. The child has bonded with us, said quietly. Not because we forced it, Not because we did anything wrong. It bonded with us because it needed something that your machines cannot provide. Impossible. Is it? Took a step closer to ignoring the danger. You said yourself that was developing normally before we arrived. But what does normal mean? A child raised without touch, without warmth, without anyone to hold it when it's scared. He shook his head. That's not normal, Hi, that's torture. His claws twitched. You know nothing of our ways. I know that every species in the galaxy needs connection. I know that children need love, no matter what species they belong to. And I know that your child reached past food, past survival itself, just to touch another living hand. His voice softened. That tells me everything I need to know about what truly needs. Stood motionless for a long moment. His yellow eyes stared at with something that might have been hatred, or might have been fear. Finally, he spoke. Our physicians performed extensive scans on the youngling. They found something unexpected. He paused, struggling with the words. Ancient texts speak of a phenomenon called the soul thread. It was an instinctive bond that formed between parent and child in our species' earliest days. We believed it had been eliminated through selective breeding over countless generations. But it wasn't, said softly. It was just dormant. Scales rippled with what might have been shame. The physicians believe that has formed a soul thread with your kind, specifically with the sensation you call warmth. Your body heat, your touch, your emotional presence. These things activated something ancient in the child's mind. And now asked. Now the child is dying. His voice cracked on the last word. Without the source of the bond, without the warmth it is attached to, will waste away. Our physicians have never seen this condition before. They do not know how to treat it. Stepped forward, her fear forgotten. Let us see the child. Let us help. You have already done enough. We can help, his voice rose. We didn't cause this, Hi, we just woke up something that was always there, something your child needed. If it's dying without warmth, then give it warmth. Let us be there for it. Looked at her with those cold, yellow eyes, but something in them had changed. The anger was still there, but beneath it could see something else. Desperation. If I allow this, said slowly, I will be admitting that everything my people believe is wrong. I will be saying that our methods of raising children are flawed, that we have been harming our young for generations. Or, said gently, you will be saying that you love your child enough to do whatever it takes to save it, even if that means changing everything you thought you knew. The silence stretched on forever. Finally turned away and pressed a button on the wall. A screen lit up, showing an image of a small chamber. In the corner, curled into a tight ball, was the cub's eyes were closed and its small body shook with silent sobs. Even through the screen, could feel the child's pain. You will come with me, said. His voice was barely a whisper. You will see my child, and if you can truly help it, he paused, his claws trembling against the wall, then I will listen to whatever you have to say. He walked toward the door without waiting for a response. The three humans followed. And somewhere deep in the station, a lonely cub sensed something changing. It lifted its head from the cold floor and opened its eyes. For the first time in days, it felt something other than emptiness. It felt hope. The chamber was small and cold, like every other room on the station. Medical drones floated near the ceiling, their sensors blinking with data that meant nothing to the humans. Physicians stood along the walls, watching with expressions that were impossible to read. In the corner, curled into a tight ball, was. The cub was smaller than remembered. Its scales had lost their shine, turning dull and gray. It was not moving, except for the tiny trembles that ran through its body with each breath. The sound it made was soft and broken, a keening whimper that cut through the silence like a blade. Felt her heart crack. Can we approach? Asked. The High stood frozen near the door. His yellow eyes were fixed on his child, and for the first time saw something other than cold logic on his face. He saw pain, raw, terrible pain. "Do what you must," said. His voice was hollow. Moved first. She walked slowly across the chamber, her footsteps soft against the metal floor. The medical drones shifted overhead, tracking her movement, but she ignored them. Her entire focus was on the small figure in the corner. She said gently, "It's me. Do you remember me?" The cub's eyes opened. They were dull at first, empty and exhausted, but then something sparked in them. Recognition, hope. Lifted its head and looked at. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out. Knelt down, bringing herself to the cub's level. She held out her hand, palm up, just like before. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here." For a long moment did not move. It just stared at her hand with those huge, desperate eyes. Then slowly, the cub uncurled itself. It crawled forward on shaky limbs, its claws clicking against the floor. The physicians shifted nervously, but raised a hand to stop them from interfering. Reached hand and touched it with trembling fingers. The cool scales met warm skin, and the cub made a sound that was half sob, half sigh. Then it climbed into his arms. Caught the cub instinctively, wrapping her arms around its small body and pulling it close to her chest. Pressed against her, seeking warmth, seeking contact, seeking something it had been starving for its entire life. And then something happened that no one in the room had ever heard before. Began to purr. It was a low, rumbling sound that came from deep in the cub's chest. It vibrated through his body like a heartbeat. The physicians stared in shock. One of them dropped his. Another made a strange, choking sound. Stood perfectly still, his yellow eyes wide. "What is that sound?" he asked. His voice was barely audible. "It's purring," said softly. He stepped closer, his own eyes bright with emotion. "On Earth, some animals make this sound when they are happy and safe, when they feel loved." "Loved," repeated. The word sounded foreign on his tongue. Held, feeling the cub's purr grow stronger. "Your child is not broken, it's not defective. It just needs something that machines cannot give it, something that all children need." "What?" "Touch, warmth, the feeling of being held by someone who cares." Looked up at with tears streaming down her face. "Needs to be loved, that's all, that's everything." Did not respond. He stood there watching his child purr in the arms of an alien, and something in his face began to change. The cold mask cracked. The yellow eyes softened. For the first time in his long life, looked uncertain. Over the next several days, the humans took turns staying with. They were supervised at all times, watched by physicians and guards who did not understand what they were seeing. But the results were undeniable. Began to eat again. Its scales regained their shine. It gained strength, walking around the chamber on steady legs, exploring with curious eyes. But it always stayed close to the humans, always within reach of their hands. Read to the cub using a translation device. He read stories from Earth, tales of adventure and friendship and love. Listened with wide eyes, drinking in every word, asking questions in its small, chirping voice. Surprised everyone. The gruff military captain, who had shown nothing but suspicion and caution since arriving on the station, turned out to have a gentle side. He found materials in the maintenance section and built a small toy, a spinning top that glowed with soft light. The cub played with it for hours, laughing, actually laughing, as it watched the colors dance. Taught simple games. She held its clawed hands and guided it through movements the cub had never learned. Clapping games, dance steps, simple things that human children learned before they could walk. Absorbed everything with desperate hunger, as if making up for a lifetime of emptiness. Other began to watch. At first they stayed at the edges of the chamber, hidden in doorways and corners. They observed with cold, analytical eyes, taking notes, recording data. But as the days passed, something changed in them too. They started watching differently. Less like scientists studying an experiment, more like people witnessing something they had never imagined possible. One evening, an elderly approached in the corridor outside's chamber. She was ancient, her scales faded to pale gray, her movements slow and careful. "Ambassador," she said quietly, "may I speak with you?" Nodded and stepped aside with her. "I have lived for 230 years, the said. I have served on this station for over a century. I have watched countless younglings raised in our development centers, trained by our methods, shaped by our beliefs." She paused, her yellow eyes growing distant. "I never questioned it. Why would I? It was how things were done, how they had always been done." "And now," asked gently, "now I watch that child with your people and I see something I do not understand." She turned to look at him directly. "The youngling is happy, not efficient, not productive, not optimized, simply happy. I did not know such a thing was possible." "It's possible for everyone," said. "No matter the species, no matter the culture, happiness is not a weakness. It's what makes life worth living." There was silence for a long moment. "We removed this from ourselves," she said finally. "Long ago, our ancestors decided that emotions made us weak, that attachment was dangerous, that love was a primitive impulse to be overcome." She shook her head slowly. "We thought we were making ourselves stronger, but watching your kind with that child, I wonder if we removed something essential instead." Did not know how to respond. He simply stood there, letting the weight of her words settle in the cold air. "I will speak to the council," the said. "I do not know if they will listen, but I will try." She turned and began to walk away, then stopped. "Thank you, Ambassador, for showing us what we had forgotten." She disappeared around the corner and stood alone in the corridor. Inside the chamber, laughter echoed off the metal walls. It was a small sound, easily lost in the vastness of the station. But it was growing. And somewhere, deep in the hearts of a people who had forgotten how to feel, something was beginning to wake up. The negotiation chamber was filled with. They sat in perfect rows, their scales gleaming under the cold lights, their yellow eyes fixed on the platform at the center of the room. The air was thick with tension. Hai stood at the platform, his claws folded behind his back. He had not spoken to the humans since allowing them to care for. He had watched from a distance, silent and unreadable, as his child transformed before his eyes. Now, for the first time in weeks, he was ready to speak. He began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We have gathered to discuss the future of our alliance with the human species. As you know, the negotiations were interrupted by an unexpected situation." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew about, everyone had heard the stories. "Before we proceed," continued, "I wish to propose an amendment to the treaty, one that goes beyond military cooperation and trade agreements, one that addresses something far more important." He paused and noticed that his claws were trembling. "I propose that we invite human cultural advisors into society, not as diplomats, not as allies, but as teachers." His voice grew stronger. "Teachers of something our species has lost, something we must learn again." The murmurs turned to shocked silence. One of them stood up, his scales bristling with anger. "This is madness. You would invite primitives to teach us, we who have conquered star systems, we who have built empires that span galaxies." "We have built empires," agreed, "but we have forgotten how to build families. We raise our children with machines and we wonder why they grow up cold and empty. We remove emotion from our lives and we wonder why existence feels meaningless." He shook his head. "I watched my own child dying, because it had never been touched by another living being, and I stood there helpless because I did not know how to help." The angry opened his mouth to respond, but cut him off. "Then I watched 3 humans do what I could not. They held my child, they played with it, they gave it warmth and love, and my child came back to life." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. Tell me how that makes them primitive. Tell me how that makes them less than us." The chamber fell silent. stepped forward from where he had been standing at the edge of the room, and followed close behind. Hai said, "If I may speak." Nodded. "We did not come here to change your culture. We came to build an alliance to find common ground between our peoples. But sometimes, common ground appears in unexpected places." He looked around at meeting their yellow eyes one by one. What we found here was not weakness. It was strength. The strength of a child who refused to give up on its need for connection. The strength of a father willing to question everything he believed to save his child. He turned back to, "You spoke of building families. On Earth we have a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. No one can do it alone, not parents, not machines, not empires, we all need each other," smiled softly. "That's not primitive, that's wisdom, and it's something we would be honored to share with you." The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the elderly, the one who had spoken to in the corridor, rose from her seat. "I support the amendment," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "I have watched the human child-rearing methods with my own eyes. I have seen what they can do, and I believe it is time for our people to learn." One by one, others began to stand. Some looked uncertain, some looked afraid, but they stood, adding their voices to the growing chorus. When the final vote was counted, the amendment passed. The treaty would be signed, and with it, a new chapter in history would begin. Later that day, a formal ceremony was held in the grand hall of the station. Representatives from both species gathered to witness the signing. Cameras recorded every moment for broadcasts across space and beyond. But the moment everyone remembered came after the official ceremony ended. Little, who had been standing beside its father throughout the proceedings, suddenly broke away. It crossed the chamber in quick, excited steps, weaving through the crowd of tall and surprised humans. It stopped in front of. The cub looked up at her with bright, shining eyes. Its scales were healthy again, its body strong. But more than that, there was something in its face that had not been there before. Joy, pure, simple joy. Reached up with both small hands. Knelt down and took them in her own. The cool scales met warm skin, and both of them smiled. Behind them, watched. His yellow eyes were soft in a way that no had seen before. "My people conquered stars and built empires," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the hushed chamber. "We believed ourselves superior to all other species in the galaxy. We thought emotions were weaknesses to be eliminated, attachments to be severed, love to be forgotten." He paused, his gaze moving to his child's small claws wrapped around the human woman's warm fingers. "We did not know what we had lost until a human offered a snack, and my child reached for the hand instead." The treaty was named that day, not for the political agreements it contained, not for the military alliances it established, but for the simple gesture that had changed everything. They called it the Treaty of Hands. And across space, in development centers and government buildings, in private homes and public squares, something began to change. Parents looked at their children with new eyes. They reached out with trembling claws, unsure of what to do, unsure of how to begin. But they reached out, and their children reached back. 15 years later, Ambassador Park returned to His hair was completely gray now, his step a little slower, but his eyes were still kind and his smile was still warm. He was greeted at the spaceport by a young diplomat, tall and strong, with scales that shimmered like polished emeralds. The diplomat stood with perfect posture, its face formal and professional. But there was something in its eyes, something that had not existed in for thousands of years. "Ambassador Park," the diplomat said, extending a clawed hand, "welcome back." Took the hand without hesitation. "It's good to see you." For a moment the formal mask held. Then it cracked and smiled, a real smile full of warmth and memory and love. "I still remember the warmth," said softly so only could hear. "I teach it now, to everyone I can, in schools, in homes, in the halls of government. The diplomat's grip tightened gently around his hand. "You gave my people something we had forgotten we needed, and we will never forget." Felt tears forming in his eyes. He squeezed hand and smiled. "That's all we ever hoped for." They walked together into the spaceport, hand in claw, teacher and student reunited after all these years. Behind them, the stars burned bright and warm. And somewhere in the galaxy, a child reached out for its parent's hand. And for the first time, the parent reached back.